Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our July webinar, Greenlight Your Book, Opportunities for Authors in the New Era of Publishing, featuring Brooke Warner and our very own Robin Cutler. I'm excited to introduce you to Robin and Brooke, but first I have a couple housekeeping rules. Well, not really rules, but just FYIs that you guys should know. First off, we'll be live tweeting, and there should be a little Twitter widget in your preview, so you can tweet, and it should have all of the correct handles in there already. So you just send out your tweet, and we'll be engaged with you on Twitter. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation, there's also a widget for that near the bottom of your screen to the left. You can ask those questions. We'll be answering them throughout the presentation, and then also we'll have time at the end. We'll save about 10 minutes, 10 minutes to answer any live questions. Not live, I'll be reading them. If we don't get to all of them, what will happen is we'll take those all into consideration. We'll have Brooke and Robin answer them, and then we post them in the comment section on our YouTube channel, which is where the webinar will be placed about 72 hours after the webinar. There's also a printable version of the presentation in case you want to print it out for future use, take notes on it, things like that. There's a widget at the bottom of your screen where you can download that and print it out. This is recorded, so like I said, it'll be on YouTube. And then also just keep in mind that we do these monthly. It'll be different varying self-publishing topics. And every month, usually about the third week of the month, you can catch us here with some new topic. And then you can find out about them via our social media on Facebook, Twitter, to find out when they are and to sign up. So that is all I have. I'm excited to introduce you to Robin Cutler. She is the director of IngramSpark. She is a publishing industry maven. She's been around and knows what she's doing. And I'm going to hand it over to Robin now.
Oh, well, thank you, Kristen. And I'm so excited to introduce my guest today, who is Brooke Warner, and hopefully some of you know Brooke. She's the publisher of She Writes Press, and also the author of a brand new book that's out today called Greenlight Your Book. Brooke is also the former executive editor of Seal Press and sits on the board, along with myself, of the Independent Book Publishers Association, the Bay Area Book Festival, and the National Association of Memoir Writers. You may read her frequently in her posts on the Huffington Post and at shewrites.com. So welcome today, Brooke, and congratulations on the publication of your new book.
Thank you, Robin. I'm thrilled to be here and excited to be talking about this topic, which is a lot about this concept of Greenlight Your Book, but also largely about what is going on in this industry and what is happening with different choices authors have. And so I guess I will just dive right in, yes?
Yeah, get going.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, and hello, everyone. So lots of times when I do these kinds of presentations, I'm talking to people who are starting to feel like they think they want to self-publish. And even when that's the case, I find that people still have these lingering questions about other aspects of publishing, and sometimes what-if questions, or feeling disillusioned with the traditional side and not totally understanding what is going on in publishing in general, which makes perfect sense because it is pretty crazy out there right now. And this first note that I have on this slide is that publishing is a spectrum, not an either-or. And I want to start by talking about this because I think a lot of people truly understand this dynamic or polarization, I guess, between self-publishing and traditional publishing. I understand traditional publishing on one side with advances and, the publisher sort of taking care of everything for you, and then self-publishing on the other side often has also an extreme where you do everything yourself and where you're figuring it all out. And the fact of the matter is that there's all this other stuff in between. You don't have to go it alone just because you choose to self-publish. There are so many options around author-assisted publishing and people whose whole business is making it easier for you. There's so much educational opportunities out there for authors to start to understand and learn about this stuff. And then if you don't want to learn it, there are options as well. And at the outset, Robin mentioned that I'm the publisher of She Writes Press. And I just want to put that into context because She Writes Press is what is called a hybrid publisher, and we are not alone in that space. And it's largely lately been called the gray zone of publishing because there are all of these publishing companies emerging that are somewhere between traditional and self-publishing, and they're doing all kinds of interesting things. Like one of the things that sets us apart, for instance, is that we use Ingram for traditional distribution. We vet our projects. And there's many other kinds of things that other hybrid publishers do that are different than what we do. That said, this is a lot going to be about for authors who want to self-publish. And on the self-publishing side, even hybrid authors might be lumped into an overarching umbrella of self-published authors or independent authors because as independent authors, we are subsidizing our own work no matter what. And so unless you have a traditional publisher paying you to publish under their imprint, then you are what we're calling in the industry right now an indie author, which is a co-opted term. That used to be reserved for authors from independent houses, but I'm fully on board with the idea of any author who is subsidizing their own work and greenlighting their own work, which is really the topic of my book, owning that label, because we are the ones right now that have the independent spirit. We are the ones that are saying yes to ourselves despite this crazy environment in book publishing where the barriers to entry in traditional publishing are getting so high. And as I always like to say, it's not around how good your work is. You're not being barred from traditional publishing because you don't have a good book. You're being barred from traditional publishing because you don't have a big enough author platform, which kind of translates into you're not famous enough. So I want to just say about the self-published space, that that self-published authors are changing the face of publishing. And so I want to talk through some of these ideas today of busting the myth of the author and why I believe that traditional publishing has lost its mandate. So we'll talk about this as well. And so, but I first want to put into context, we are all indie authors. Anyone who greenlights their own work is an indie author. And this notion of traditional publishing having lost its mandate really stems from this idea that their acquisitions decisions are so largely marketing driven instead of being editorially driven. I'm going to move into this idea of don't wait for someone else's yes, and it connects to this dream that I do think a lot of authors hold out. Whether you change your mind later or from the very beginning you're open to self-publishing, but still you're thinking, well, what if? And I know a lot of people who are in this decision-making space. They are feeling like, well, I might want to traditionally publish if that happened, but how long should I wait? Recently, I was spending time with one of my own authors who told me a story that she had shopped her book around for over a year and was also considering She Writes Press. And when she finally made the decision to go with She Writes Press, another one of these traditional but small presses called her and said, is your book still available because we think we're interested? But she had already made the decision in her heart and mind that she was ready to move forward and have more creative control and do it herself. And the offer that they were making was not compelling enough for her to change her mind. And so this was an example of an author who I felt like had truly come on board with this notion of the benefits of greenlighting your own work, of which there are many. When I mentioned in the previous slide this myth of the author, that myth stems from sort of a 1950s viewpoint of what it means to be an author, where you're going to get an advance for your work and where the house is going to cultivate you as a talent and they're going to want many more books from you and you will make enough money on your advance to pay for you to be a full-time writer. I still hear this from authors all the time, like, I'm counting on the money. I was like, honey, don't count on the money, because even if you got a traditional deal, it's not going to be something that it can sustain you for even more than a few months, honestly. And I don't know very many people who are knocking out 3 books a year to be able to sustain themselves on the kinds of advance that might even be possible. So try to, let go of that 1950s viewpoint, or even the notion that traditional publishers are giving their authors red carpet treatment at this point, because they're not. Many authors are publishing on traditional houses, and they're getting small advances, not very much attention from their editors, and then very small marketing budgets. And so this is even more of a reason why I'm such an advocate for greenlighting your own work, because if the traditional publishing industry were offering something profound, that would be one thing. But really what they're offering is somewhat lackluster, and that 1% of authors, the Danielle Steeles or the Toni Morrisons, the people who have been cultivated for a really long time, those are the people who are getting that kind of treatment. And people will often say to me, well, Annie Lamott, never had a platform before she got published, and that's because the industry has changed. It's not 1980 anymore. And so right now there are more and more books in the marketplace, and while on the one hand that might seem discouraging to some authors, I think it's an incredible opportunity for you as authors to get your work out there and to really, not just sell your own work, but to build your own author platform, which is building a presence for yourself online. So when I say, online and in person, don't forget about that. The platform is not exclusively about online, and I'll get into more about author platform in a moment. So when it's time to greenlight your work is if you have waited more than 6 months to hear back from an editor, especially if you're receiving what I call glowing rejections, which means that they love your work. You get that like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. You remind, your prose reminds me of, fill in the blank famous author, but we can't sell it. It's so frustrating for authors because they're like, wow, so it's great and you don't want me. That's usually an indication that you should find an alternate path to publish. And then this part, obviously, your feedback is more about your lack of author platform and brand than the work. When they say something like, sorry, but you don't have a big enough social media presence, or you really need to go work on your platform. You can take that as a point of encouragement because you can go work on your platform. And I often encourage authors to publish as a really solid first step to start to work on the author platform, because with books under your belt, you suddenly are an attractive author who people may want to invite to speak or to guest post, or opportunities open for you all of a sudden once you're a published author. And so you want to be looking at the long vision of this, of publishing more than one book, hopefully several, over the course of your career.
Yeah, and to your point on that, Brooke, the book is often an entree into, all kinds of activities that, are going to push you forward as far as your brand as an author.
Yes, and it's so important when people are finding themselves up against a wall with, okay, I don't know how to build my platform. I don't know how to get more visible than I already am. Another big one that happens is authors who say, I've submitted my work to, you name it, trying to get published, from salon.com to, Huffington Post, wherever people are trying to get content placements, and they're not getting any bites. And then all of a sudden they'll publish a book and they're an author, and their bio says, I am the author of this book, and those editors are suddenly a lot more interested, and then they start to get content. So it is a snowball effect that starts to happen, the legitimacy that happens when you begin to publish your own work. So that's a huge reason to move forward and do that. So with regard to publishing platforms, and part of what we've been putting out on social media is this notion that authors are choosing to publish their own work and kind of even moving away from traditional publishing in some spaces when they're traditionally published authors. And so I do want to qualify this type of person that exists, the hybrid author, which is different than hybrid publishing. The hybrid author is someone who publishes both traditionally and non-traditionally. And many, many authors I know are doing both, or they have been traditionally published in the past, and now they're moving toward alternative forms of publishing. And again, that's just because the publishing industry, the traditional side, is contracting a lot. And so what's available to us lots of times, especially because we want to have creative freedom and we want to put our books out and to experiment with different forms and to, kind of have more flexibility, is that there's all these different ways that we can publish our work. And so this that I'm talking about right now with regard to publishing platforms is just considering what kind of book you want to have. You might want to have print and ebook, but sometimes people are publishing ebooks as sort of testers, thought bubbles in essence that go out and say, well, how is this going to land with my readership? Is this something that I might expand into a longer book? And people who are putting out chapters of, for instance, if you're doing genre fiction, I've known people who have put out one chapter at a time as an ebook and then compiled the whole thing as a print book when it's done and selling the print and the ebook. And there's just lots of creative ways that you can use digital publishing to inform your print process. So I have an ebook called How to Sell Your Memoir, and it's just an ebook. And I never made it into a print book just because I decided that I didn't really want it to be that. But I had another book that I published called Breaking Ground on Your Memoir that started as an ebook, and people were asking me for the print. And so that was an indication to me that people liked it enough that it was worth turning it into a print book. And so that's what I mean by testers. You can test your market. And then with the new book that I have, there was never any question in my mind that I was going to do them simultaneous, so that, Greenlight Your Book was going to be print and ebook. But there are different kinds of strategies for different kinds of authors. And the second point here is about passive versus active authors. It's just to know that if you feel passive or you don't really want to learn all this stuff or it feels overwhelming to you, you don't have to. There are so many services that can help you get your book published. You want to make sure that you're going with someone reputable. There are many, many, many companies out there that are looking to exploit authors, so be careful. And the old truism, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, rings true here. I recently had an author contact me that some publishing company said they could do her 4-color children's book, including illustrations, for $2,000. And I just was like, I don't know if that sounds right. Let's look at what services they're actually offering you, because to me that sounds like it's going to be an upsell, that was some base level they were going to grab her at, and then by the time she was done, she was going to spend $6,000. So be conscientious and ask questions, really understand what you're getting into. Robin and I have talked about this notion that authors sometimes don't know what to ask, and why would you? It's a brand new industry and there's a huge learning curve. So looking into someone who can support you or consult you, or hiring someone you feel like you really trust because they come from the recommendation of someone else. And then IngramSpark is definitely a wonderful, wonderful resource. I'm for sure on the pro Ingram side, and while I think that CreateSpace is a fine space to print your book for some of you, I always recommend also using IngramSpark, and I never recommend using CreateSpace for your interior designs and your covers. There's just too many other good places that you can go to get your covers and your interiors designed. So use IngramSpark if you're on this webinar as a first line of resources, because they have incredible people who are full of integrity and lots of great resources. And in terms of how to maximize your success with bookstores and other retail outlets, I bring that up here because if you decide to use IngramSpark to publish your work as a publishing platform for the print, first of all, the quality is great. but the quality of the book is really, really nice, and people always comment on how much they love the books coming out of Ingram. But you do have to set the correct discounts, and you have to make sure that you make your books returnable. Then you want to opt into the extended distribution, and your books will be available through bookstores. But people often are confused and frustrated by not being able to get into bookstores, and it's usually because they haven't set the right terms. So really be conscious of that, and again, ask the right questions. Do you have anything to add to that, Robin, just in terms of what people miss out on sometimes?
Yeah, and we talk about this all the time in IngramSpark about the importance of just what Brooke was saying. If you expect your book to be available in bookstores, you have to offer them an incentive to do that. The other thing I always say is make sure that you don't wait until after you have published your book or even, just about to publish it before you form a relationship with that bookstore or even library that's in your community. They should know you. You should be a customer of the store. You should be a patron of the library if you're asking for an advice from a librarian. And don't expect them to bend over backwards to you when you show up, in the store with your newly published Create Space book. It's just not going to work like that.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, there are many stores that will not carry Create Space books. So it's another reason to publish your book on IngramSpark, and or to do it simultaneous. But the print book and being available in Ingram is pretty much critical to your success with bookstores. And so the service that Ingram offers here to make your book available through Ingram is really a valuable one, especially for self-published authors. And so with regard to hiring out, I write here, hire out or become an expert. So if it appeals to you to become an expert, that's fantastic. Sometimes people get so passionate about book publishing and it becomes a passion or a second career sometimes, a hobby. It is really exciting and there's a lot to know. It's also really daunting. There is a lot to know. And for a lot of us who've been in the industry for years and years and years, I'm still learning and still figuring out all this stuff. And so I think that then sometimes hiring a consultant or someone who can really give you some good advice can help you avoid common missteps. And that particularly goes for things around design, making sure that your book is perfectly edited. In some ways, as self-published authors or authors who subsidize your own work, you're held to a much higher standard. You really have to make sure that your book, yes, competes with its traditional counterparts, but in some ways that it's better, that it's undistinguishable, right? That it just be the absolute best book that it can be, so no one is looking at it and thinking to themselves, oh, this is self-published. You can and should avoid that. I want to be clear that from my vantage point, opportunities for indie authors have never been better. I think it is a really exciting time in the industry. I am sort of vocally disappointed with the traditional industry that I come out of. I spent 13 years in the traditional industry, most recently at Seal Press. But this consolidation, of the bigger houses eating up the smaller imprints has led to a sort of hegemony that is just making the decisions at bigger houses less interesting. Their decisions being more marketing driven also means that they're more bottom line driven. So the opportunity for us, of course, is that there are all these voices that need and want to be heard, amazing stories that aren't getting the support of the traditional space, and yet it doesn't really matter in a lot of ways because there are all of these opportunities for alternate publishing, and because the distribution aspects are getting stronger, because people are seeing the success of self-published and author-subsidized books, we are seeing a major shift in the industry. There's still certain stigma and certain things that are lingering that as independent authors we need to band together to keep working on, but the shift, even from 5 years ago is tremendous. So I personally have found that I don't feel like I experience very many barriers. I'm having a reading tonight at one of the biggest bookstores in my area, in the Bay Area, at Book Passage. They're carrying my book. There's no issues whatsoever, in terms of having my book available at Amazon. So I personally have experienced very few barriers, and so it feels very empowering and exciting to be controlling my own process. And of course, I have a publishing background, but I've also consulted with a lot of people to make sure that this book is rivaling its traditional counterparts in terms of design and editorial quality and interior and cover design both. So when I say that the success part has to do with you, it's about being conscientious. I have so many authors that I work with over the years who it's like they sabotage themselves unintentionally, and it's kind of like not knowing what you don't know. So if you're going to self-publish, awesome, great, do it. But do make sure that you get it vetted by someone who has some experience in the industry and who can tell you, yes, that's a great book cover, or no, it's not. It has problems, and here's what the problems are. Make sure that your interiors are on par with the interiors that you would see at bookstores. Don't skimp. Like I had this woman who just spent like a lot of time, money, and resources to make this incredible book, and then she didn't do a proofread. I couldn't understand that. And then when the book came out, one of the women who blurbed her book was so upset with the typos that she wrote her an email saying, I can't support this book. You have my name on it. And so she had to destroy a print run of 1,000 copies and reprint her book. That happens.
Yeah, you hear those kind of stories all the time, and it's not unique. Like, we have a lot of authors that are coming to IngramSpark that were traditionally published, and they have stories of, not being happy with the quality of their finished books, and now wanting, to control the actual product.
Yes, absolutely. And so it's so important to, no matter what your publishing path is, to even if you're going to be passive, by which I mean you're going to let someone else kind of inform your process, you still have to be the driver. You still have to be the person who's like, okay, I am in charge of this process, and calling the shots and not, splurging in all these other areas and then skimping on one small thing. And I just see that happening all the time, and I don't always, who knows the reasons behind all of that, but it happens, right? And sometimes unintentional stuff happens. I have been privy to many typos. You might look at something 100 times. You need to have many people look at that, or especially get a final proofread. On the second point about being a visionary and not a renegade, it goes into this point. People often, I like renegades personally, but when it comes to book publishing, there's a very important distinction around when you're a renegade. Sometimes you're doing stuff that is not really playing by the industry rules, and that is not going to support your success. So if you like being a renegade or a rebel, consider it within the industry shifting that frame just a little bit to be a visionary. And you can be an indie visionary and you can be very creative, but you still have to work within the confines of what is expected of you in this industry if you want to succeed. So for instance, I had an author who wanted to do some really off trim size, and she was explaining to me all the reasons why it was going to be cool, and I was like, no, the bookstores are not going to carry it. It doesn't make sense in your genre to do this wacky trim size, and that's a small thing. It's like, whoa, rebel without a cause, to have a weird trim size, but it's true. The bookstores have reasons for why they want things to be the way that they are, and so you want to just make sure that the things that you're choosing to do support your future success.
Yeah, and that sort of custom trim size that you're talking about that, your author got so attached to, that also increased the cost of her book and cost a lot more to bring that book to market. Even if she could bring it to market, it would cost more. So that's a really good point. Yeah.
So, and I already mentioned the stuff about indie authors being held to a different standard. So you have to really up your game, and it's worth it. It's worth it because you are going to be have an awesome product that you're attached to forever. So part of this webinar, and kind of winding down to the second half here, is just talking about success strategies. And I like to help authors think about the industry and sort of where they sit, but also to be really clear about ways that you can make yourself successful in this space that is really crowded and intense. You absolutely can rise above the crowd with a good book and with a good message. So content is king is my first one. Write, and publish, by which I mean you're never done. A lot of people finish their book and then they're like, great, that's that, publish it, and I'll just sit back and kind of watch what happens. And that's not how it needs to be. It needs to be that you write and you finish your book, and then it just is beginning. Right after your book is published, you want to keep writing content and keep putting yourself out there, because the part of the success strategy here is more visibility, which is my last point. The more content equals more visibility, and the more you are doing stuff, and it's not only about writing, it's also about something like I'm doing right now, a webinar, teaching something that you know. It could be in the post-publication part of your book, being on someone's radio show. It could be contributing a guest blog post to someone that's connected to what you're doing. And there's all of this in genre fiction. There's all of this in fiction. The novelists are always the first one to raise their hand and say, oh, that doesn't pertain to me because I'm writing a novel, and so what would I possibly write about? I say this with love, but I think it's a cop-out. There's infinite number of things that you can write about, and your issues that are central to your novel are valuable, important things that caused you to write that novel in the first place. And so you can become an expert on the issues that are central to your novel or central to your memoir, and you want to be. So when I say how and why to be a content monster, it means being creative. It means being interested enough in what you've written about that you can see shoot-offs and other kinds of content that you could write, things that you could share with other people. So there's just, and many people have topical books. Like I just talked to a woman who is deciding to self-publish because she, at the center of her book is something about terrorism. Well, unfortunately, I don't think terrorism is going to, be topical. I think it's going to keep going on, but she wants to get something out now this fall because she feels like it's kind of front and center on people's minds, and I think she's right. And so she's going to kind of push to get this thing out, but she's going to be writing on the topic. She feels very connected to the topic, and there are infinite number of things that she can write, and then unfortunate things happen in the news, then she can opine on that because she's written a novel. And someone was just telling me recently, that during, I think it was during the Cold War. No, so I'm forgetting what war. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a moment here, but it was during a recent war, not the Cold War, much more recent than that. Maybe it was Iraq, that Tom Clancy was the expert that all of the news shows were bringing on. Well, his expertise,
that was the first Iraq War. Yeah.
The first Iraq War. Thank you. I know my mind went like the 50s. But yeah, and I thought that was a really interesting point, because Tom Clancy is a novelist, but he has really become an expert in his content, as anyone else, should be, who's writing books about subjects that they're passionate about. So in terms of how greenlighting your book grows your author platform, the reason for that is because when you don't have a book, you don't have authority, and so the book suddenly makes you an expert and legitimizes you as an author and as an expert on the topic that you have published into. So for those people who are waiting, I always say, go for it, greenlight it, see what happens. If you still hold out that dream of traditional publishing, do it with your second book. Do the first book so well that your second book would have that opportunity, and go and build content for yourself and thereby build visibility and an audience, and you will learn so much by doing so. The next success strategy is to educate yourself so that you know how to talk to people in the industry. I spent a lot of time on my new book talking about this subject, and the reason is because it is so important that you really learn how to walk the talk. You need to treat your book as a product because that's how industry people treat it. And so what I mean is like, there's so much kind of like, oh, you know, I need and want people to love my book and it's my baby. And I understand all of the emotional ties to your book, but when you go and talk about your book out in the world, you can't talk about it like that. It doesn't go over well. Industry people are seeing hundreds, if not thousands of books a week. So you need to be succinct. You need to really be able to pitch your book. You need to understand its themes, why it's important, how it's positioned. I say learn what different industry players need and help them help you. It's kind of Robin's point of, you know, like if you're going to go into a bookstore, don't say, well, I never come in here and no one I know shops here. You have to really, like, this is your community. And same goes with the library. You know, if you want people to support you, you need to be able to support them too. And you want to be coming with, armed with information that they need. And so I encourage all of my authors, for instance, to create a one sheet that has all of their blurbs and any publicity that they might have gotten, or to do a press release and to know how to use those things. So again, if this is a particular point of interest to you, there's a lot of information on this topic in my book that I'm not going to get into now. But the important thing is that you understand that this is not something to take lightly. And many people don't take it lightly, but then somehow their actions don't really match up with the real desire that they have for their book to get out into the world. So if you have a real desire for your book to get out into the world and then you publish it and then you're just like, okay, now it's available, your energy is not meeting up with what you say your expectations are. If you have expectations, then you need to be thinking about a publicity campaign 3 to 6 months in advance of publishing your work. Many self-published authors, unfortunately, publish the book and then go, oh, now what should I do about publicity? And it really, in the industry, it should be the reverse. And so this is part of educating yourself about how the industry works so that you actually have a shot at being the successful author that you want to be. And then the third strategy, and I think this is an important one, it's an important one to me, to be an ambassador for indie authors. I am an ambassador for indie authors, but I think when you are an indie author, really embracing that this is the new frontier and that we are the ones who are responsible to level the playing field. What I mentioned about the stigma earlier lifting, it's true, but the reason that it's lifting is because all of these independent authors are saying, I am at choice. I am doing this because I want to. I have a great book that I am proud of, and I'm going to sell the heck out of it. And the industry can do what they want with that, right? But I know a lot of authors who are kind of shy or embarrassed or they don't want to talk about it. They look at things like not being accepted for certain contests or reviews, and they just go, oh, okay. I agree with that sort of orientation, I guess, to the industry. I think that if we say, you know what, actually, why doesn't my book qualify? You know, what's wrong with it? That if we in numbers start to say, guess what, we're as good as our traditional counterpoints, and so we want our book to speak for itself. The industry will start to get in line because it will have to. So this is my vision for the future, and I believe that it's a success strategy for all of us because we're in this together. And so I end my talk on a point of advocacy that I feel strongly about, and that we support one another, because you will see that your success is going to come from other people who support you and who legitimately want your success, and that comes when you legitimately want the success of other people as well. There's a reciprocity there, and once you start hanging out with authors, you're going to see that authors really are the most generous people around. So they're an exciting group to get to know.
And to that point, Brooke, because you and I both are board members of the Independent Book Publisher Association, I just want to make sure that our audience knows about that association, the good work that they do as far as educating authors and becoming part of a community where you'll be, educated as far as the industry, but also, you'll get a lot of support from other authors. So again, that's the Independent Book Publisher Association, and we'll provide a link to that here at the end.
Great. Yes. So another really great place for resources and to, just when we're talking about trusted places to go, IBPA is very much got authors' backs. So, yes.
So here's your book.
Yeah. Yes. Here's my book. So please, take a look at it. If some of the things that I said intrigued you today, find me on Twitter, and if you let me know that you followed me because of today's webinar, I will follow you right back. That's another way to build your platform, is to get followers and to follow people and share their stuff. And I'm giving away a chapter from the book, so there's a teaser. You can certainly start with that at my website, brookewarner.com/greenlight chapter giveaway. So you have to type that into the URL. Sorry, it's a little long, but I hope that you'll take a look.
Yeah, and we also will provide a link to the IngramSpark bookstore, where we feature and recommend especially books related to self-publishing that we really like, and we'll have Brooke's book available through our bookstore as well.
This was awesome. Thank you.
This was really great. A couple of things I just wanted to kind of also kind of bring to light is, your comments about, a lot of authors are publishing traditionally and also publishing, self-publishing, and those are the hybrid authors. We are seeing so many authors come to us who, started with a traditional publishing deal and just weren't really happy with it. And, that whole point about controlling your own work and making sure that you bring it to light in a responsible sort of way that you feel like you've been a big part of, is the reason that a lot of people are now self-publishing. So you're exactly right on point about that.
Yes, and I see a lot of people these days who are choosing to leave traditional publishing, or who were published traditionally, and then for any number of reasons, their publishers are just not publishing them anymore. And then I've also seen people who get a publishing deal, the publisher does a hardcover, and then they don't do the paperback. And that's another really hard thing for authors to wrap their minds around. They're like, wait, you're not even going to give it a chance to be in paperback? That's kind of strange. So this creative control piece, I think, is enticing, and that's why I go back to the sort of the ambassador thing, because you're in good company. There are a huge number of people who are doing this, and I really feel encouraged by just this swell of it's opportunity, but it's also pride, and the creative control is exciting because you learn a lot.
Yeah, and we here, as Brooke said, we here at IngramSpark are definitely here to help you. We're advocates, as Brooke is, for indie publishing and for indie authors. The last thing that I'll say here is, when somebody asks you what you do for a living, instead of telling them your 9-to-5 job, whatever that might be, you might start practicing just responding that you're an author. And what's great about that is that instantly makes you intriguing to other people. Everybody, and then the next question, from them is, well, what are you writing? And so that's kind of the very basic beginning of building a platform, as Brooke has been sort of teaching us here. And so get used to that. Next time someone asks you what you do at a party, I want everybody to hear on the presentation to say, well, I'm an author, and just see what kind of response you get.
Well, the best response you're going to get is people saying, really, what's your book about? And then
exactly.
You get to have that conversation. And I like to share with people, because some people are really shy about that kind of stuff, and it almost makes them cringe to think about being self-promotional. Then there's people on the other side of the spectrum who love that kind of stuff, and they just can't get enough of it. So if you're on the really shy side, you need to practice and be okay with the idea that people are going to be really interested, and that it's okay, and to work on that. And if you know that you're on the opposite side of the spectrum and that you might tend to kind of get overexcited or perhaps inundate people, to practice, both are reasons to practice your pitch, to kind of rein yourself in if you know you tend to get overexcited, and then also to bring yourself out of your shell if you are the opposite kind of personality, because it's very important to hit that balance so that people are interested and want to know more, and hopefully you'll find a follower and a fan.
Yep, I so agree. So, Kristen, are there questions that we can respond to?
We do have a few. First, I wanted to take a minute and just remind everyone that this is a recorded webinar, and you can listen to it again on YouTube. You'll also get an email with the recording in it in a few days, so you'll be able to listen to it again. Also, if you have specific questions for Brooke, her Twitter is right there. It's @Brooke_Warner. And she can, on consultation and stuff like that, she can get with you there. I don't know, Brooke, is there another way that you would want people to contact you for consulting purposes?
Yeah, I have a contact form on my website, which is just my name, brookewarner.com, and on Facebook and Twitter. And I'm super easy to find and very available. Someone on Twitter today was like, I'm going to email you. And I was like, great. So, I love that when people are informing you like multiple ways that they're going to contact you.
Okay.
Like, do it.
So the first one came from Charles, and he wanted you to expand on the offering incentives to bookstores.
Well, I don't know if you can offer incentives per se. I mean, I guess it would be qualified as that. I mean, the deal with independent bookstores is that there's a number of things. I mean, number one is that you need to know up front that some bookstores won't carry your book if it's Create Space. Hopefully, if you guys are on the Ingram webinar, you're going to publish through Ingram. So that's number one. You want to bring a copy of the book in advance, far before you have you're trying to pitch your bookstore date. It's why it's such a good idea to get what we call advanced reader copies, and self-published authors should get advanced reader copies. You can print them through Ingram just like you would your regular book. It can just be an earlier version of your book or your final book, or you can get your designer to just slap on advanced reader copy on the front. But traditionally published authors have advanced reader copies, and so that can also up your game. It can make you look more professional and more serious, and then you can take that into the bookstore and you can say, here's my advanced reader copy. I just want you to see the quality. I'm local, I'm going to bring in X number of people. I mean, for a bookstore to want to host an event for you, you need to be able to pull in the crowds. It doesn't make sense. Like, I'm having my launch event today in Marin, which is a local bookstore for me. I'm not going to go into Iowa, where I don't know anyone, and try to say that I want to have a bookstore event there. You have to start from a basis of being able to pull people in. And then other incentives, I guess, would be, like I said, you could also bring in a one sheet with your ARC, but the things that the bookstore needs are to see your book, and secondly, to know that you have the capacity to bring in the people. And then they may still ask you to pay a fee. And that's okay. Unfortunately, for better or worse, it's not uncommon. It's called co-op. And so at some of the bigger bookstores like Tattered Cover and Elliott Bay, lots of them, they might charge $100 or something for you to have a launch event there, and they do that to offset their risk. So it's not them trying to take advantage of you. It's a practice.
Yeah, I would add to that what you mentioned earlier too, Brooke, about making sure your book is listed with Ingram and make sure that you have trade terms and returnability as well on your book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let them know that. Exactly. So I think those are the things I can think of, Kristen.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Tammy asked, she said, I recently had my book professionally edited and it was a complete waste of money. How do I find a real editor and not someone who's just claiming to be one?
Yeah, that's unfortunate. You know, a lot of people just call themselves editors and they don't have any training. I think it's really important that you find someone who has some industry background, who has published other books that have actually have edited books that have actually been published, or preferably who's worked in the traditional space, because they would have had to take tests to be able to get those jobs usually. So there's a group called the Independent Authors Alliance, who I think is very good. And they have people in their marketplace who advertise themselves for as editors, but they actually do. I don't know that they vet, but it's not just anyone can hang their shingle there. So obviously asking these people for references is a good idea. SheWrites.com, the group that I am part of, we have editors. So if people are looking for editors, that is another resource, and you can just contact me directly. The IBPA, Independent Book Publishers Association, that we mentioned, I believe that they would have good referrals. And I would put a plug for going to conferences, local conferences in your area, especially if it would be meaningful to you to have a local editor. I don't know that that necessarily matters, but some people really like that. Every year at the San Francisco Writers Conference, for instance, there's this 13-person editor panel. And what I really like about it is that these are editors that are just kind of talking about the trade, but they're all freelancers, and you can get a sense of their personalities. You can meet people in person. So there are lots of ways to find good people, but I think the second important part is to vet them.
Yeah, and ask other authors, too, that have had a good experience that you may know. That's always a good way to go. IngramSpark also has a list of recommended editing companies. Yeah, we do.
It's ingramspark.com/resources/experts.
We also have a list of designers, as I'm sure Brooke also has on her site. That's the other piece that I think is hard to find, not so much hard, but can be challenging to find a good designer for your book as well.
Yeah, I would say in some ways even more challenging. It's design is so important. Editing is obviously hugely important, but the thing is that if you open a book and it has a poor interior design, authors sometimes don't even know, again, because they don't know what they're looking for specifically. But industry people know. So if you take your book to a library or to a bookstore and you don't have a well-designed interior, that can sometimes cause someone to write you off before they even start reading. So it's very important to get a high-level interior and a cover design as well.
Yeah, and there's a certain format for books that follow, the way all books are done with different book parts. If your book doesn't have a title page, doesn't have a copyright page, that's a huge red flag that this is not a professional book. So make sure if you're working with a designer, if you're even doing it yourself, that you are following, the normal standard for how a book is sort of put together. All the different book parts.
Yeah, that's why it's hard to do on your own. There's many, many moving parts.
Thank you, ladies, for that. We have another one. This is from Kevin. What would you say is an effective way of marketing? As a children's author, I find that it can be difficult to aim for people in the age that I'm aimed at, years 9 to 12.
Yeah, for sure, especially with the younger market. And 9 to 12 is such a hard group because if it was younger than that, I would really say that you're marketing to the parents, but that's sort of right on the cusp of an age group that is probably online, and that would be good to reach them directly. And so maybe you go at it twofold. You have one campaign for the parents and one campaign for the kids. One of the things, children's and YA is not my particular area of expertise, but I always recommend to people that I do work with, no matter what their genre, to look at what your competition is doing and to figure out what are they doing well, what do you admire about the other authors in your space, in the 9 to 12 age group, and what is creative and interesting, and what could you do, because emulating other people is just fine. What I was saying about don't be a renegade, like sometimes people have really cool ideas and you can be a visionary and you can start, like I have an author that I'm working with right now, for instance, who has this whole gaming component of her like her empire, I guess is what I want to call it. Like she's doing books and she has a game that's attached to the book. But what I will say about her situation is that it's expensive. She's spending a lot of money to do all of these books and the gaming and the this and the that, and it's exciting and it's really cool, but that might be prohibitive for some other authors. So finding what someone else is doing that seems effective and emulating it, and then seeing what that grows into, I think that's a great place to start. This whole idea, about the test bubbles. So you might need to float a few things to see what works.
Anything to add on that, Robin?
No, she said it all. That was really great.
Okay. Are libraries a good way to promote your book? That was from David. I
don't think they're necessarily good ways to promote. So the deal is that there are industry magazines like Booklist and Library Journal, for instance, that librarians read. So a really good promotion, if you are interested in being carried by libraries, would be to run an ad in Booklist or in Library Journal. And it's even better if you happen to have a review from one of those two outlets. So librarians care about reviews, and even if you don't get a review, you can still run an ad. So I would say that I think the question is probably more geared toward how effective are library sales, because in and of themselves, libraries aren't great places to promote, but libraries are excellent places to get your book carried. Number one, because they're non-returnable. Libraries buy books and they don't return. And so lots of people are very interested in library sales. And then they are fine places to hold an event. Like you might decide that you want to do a reading at a library. So there's a way in which libraries in and of themselves and librarians are very important to the success of your book, but it's just figuring out how to reach them and how to maximize your opportunities there as part of your overall campaign, but not necessarily thinking of the libraries themselves as a promotional outlet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I agree with one particular point of Brooke's about the library market. It's almost essential that you have reviews through some of the key library journals to legitimize your book and to kind of put it on librarians' radar. The other thing is Ingram, offers some promotional things through some of the catalogs that Ingram does. So librarians, who are Ingram customers, read and use those advanced catalogs that Ingram produces to see what new books there are. So I encourage you, when you're setting up a book with Ingram or with IngramSpark, that you also, look to the marketing that Ingram offers.
Yeah, so people often overlook those kinds of opportunities or think that they're not effective, but they are. They really are, because you're putting yourself in front of book people and people who are influencers. So you might just want to consider having an advertising budget.
Wonderful, ladies. That's about all the time that we have today. Brooke, I want to thank you for your expertise and your knowledge, and Robin, thank you so much for adding in and supplementing her expertise and knowledge. This was a great webinar, and I hope everyone that's on here got a lot of awesome information out of it. We will see you next month, the third week of August. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Bye,
Krista.
everybody.
Bye, Brooke.